Ladies and gentlemen, our program will resume in 2 minutes. Please find your seats and kindly silence all portable electronic devices. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome our master moderator for today, Dr. Danielle Wood of NASA's Goddard Space Flight Center.
Good morning, everyone. Good morning. Hello. Hello, my name is Danielle Wood, and I am pleased to spend the day with you as today's master moderator. And I'm also pleased to be joining the ranks of wonderful, accomplished new generation space leaders who have held this role before me. I currently serve at NASA's Goddard Space Flight Center in Greenbelt, Maryland, in the Earth Science Division as our Applied Sciences lead. It was 13 years ago that I first interned at NASA Goddard and fell in love with Earth science applications. It brings together my interest in satellite engineering, international development, and space policy. In my current role, I help develop strategies and partnerships to help us transfer our Earth science data and results in areas such as food security, water management, and sustainable development. It is now my pleasure to introduce our next panel, and it is called Big Data and the Future of Space. To lead a fascinating discussion, I am pleased to introduce Mr. Dylan Taylor, a space investor. He's also president and COO of Colliers International. Dylan, we look forward to your panel. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Danielle. Well, it's my pleasure and honor to serve as the moderator for this panel. Just to set up the context of what we are going to cover as a panel up here, I want to maybe set the stage a little bit. In the past, I have written about the emergence of big data in the space industry, in Space News and other publications, and that was really the impetus for this panel. And one of the things that we have discussed in those articles and others is this whole notion of the emergence of hyperspectral, persistent, ubiquitous data. And in aggregation, that data set, which some have referred to as the mega set, creating value above and beyond a particular data layer. So in other words, putting data layers together to create ultimate value. In the context of that, there's also an interplay between the value of hardware versus the value of software, what various data collection techniques are relevant, whether it's microsatellites or drones or other vehicles. And so on this panel today, I'm going to pose several questions within that context and have our panelists opine on where they see the industry going vis-a-vis big data. The other two big drivers, of course, are artificial intelligence and machine learning. So I'd like to just introduce our panelists briefly, and then I'll tee up our first question. To my left here, Jeff Tarr, President and CEO of Digital Globe. Under his leadership, Digital Globe has grown annual revenue from $300 million to nearly $725 million. Prior to joining Digital Globe in 2011, Jeff served as President and COO of IHS, Chairman and CEO of Hoover's, and a Division President of Dun & Bradstreet. He is a member of the Council on Foreign Relations, and he serves on the boards of the Corporate Executive Board and the U.S. Geospatial Intelligence Foundation. He's also on the management board of Stanford Graduate School of Business. Jeff earned an undergraduate degree from Princeton and an MBA from Stanford. If you want to follow Jeff on Twitter, he's jtar1. To his left is Jane Pointner, CEO of Worldview. She's a member of Biosphere 2 design team and a member of the original crew that lived inside the sealed, self-sustaining habitat for 2 years. Jane was co-founder, president, and chairwoman of Paragon Space Development Corporation, which develops technologies for extreme environments, experiments in her patented self-sustaining habitats have flown on the ISS, Mir, and the Space Shuttle. Jane is recognized as a leader in sustainable development, and she's the author of The Human Experiment, 2 years and 20 minutes inside Biosphere 2. You can follow Jane at Worldview Space. To my right, Dr. Lars Dierud is CEO of OmniEarth, a leading Earth observation company. Lars received a bachelor's in physics from Augsburg College. He was also a Fulbright Scholar in the Space and Plasma Physics Department of the University of Oslo. He received his PhD from Boston University. As a professional, Lars has served as PI on grant contracts from the NSF, DOE, NASA, Air Force, as well as industry. He's the founder of the APL Center of the Public-Private Partnership, and he's worked on Ampere, the NSF project to measure the aurora with Iridium CubeSat programs and the utilization of commercial assets. You can follow Lars at Lars Dierud. To his right is Chris Boschhausen. He's entrepreneur in residence of Data Collective Venture Capital. It's a leading investment firm specializing in the hard, data-driven science and engineering companies. Chris co-founded Planet Labs, and as the company's CTO for 5 years, he took the company from a drawing board to having launched more satellites into space than any other company in history. Chris was previously a space mission architect at NASA Ames. After working on a number of traditional spacecraft programs at NASA, Chris co-created PhoneSat, a spacecraft built solely out of regular smartphone components. While at NASA, Chris established Singularity University, a school for studying the consequences of accelerating technological development, serving initially as interim director and later as co-chair of the Department of Space Sciences. Chris received his PhD as well as his bachelor's with first-class honors from the University of Sydney. And you can follow Chris at Boschhausen. Last but not least is Dr. Marco Villa. He's COO of Tyvek Nano Satellite Systems. His responsibilities are the day-to-day management, strategic efforts, and the acquisition and execution of satellite opportunities for government and commercial customers worldwide. Marco has worked on some of the most advanced and cutting-edge programs in the aerospace industry, from technology demonstration satellites to leading commercial efforts. He has a unique expertise that combines business management, finance, administration, and technical. Previously, Marco served as Director of Mission Operations at SpaceX, managing the missions of the Dragon spacecraft to and from the ISS. A most distinguished panel. Round of applause, please. So as I mentioned, some of the general themes that I just want to reiterate before we get into the Q&A is how can big data have potential to transform Earth observation and the industry at large? What is the interplay between hardware and software in the value creation chain? What value is there in aggregating data layers and various forms of telemetry? What is AI and machine learning's role, and what is it as a key driver in value creation? Is launch a constraint? This is something we're also going to touch on. And how is the industry likely to play out vis-a-vis big data over the next several years? So with that, I'd like to tee up the first question for Jeff and actually ask each panelist to respond in turn. And just simply ask Jeff, how is big data impacting your business?
Thanks, Dylan. You know, most believe that with the recent launch of Worldview 4, that the most exciting recent developments in our company have been in space. But actually, they've been on the ground. Advances in cloud computing and machine learning have enabled us to do things that just a few years ago we only dreamed about. Let me give you a sense of the scale of this. We're producing approximately 270 terabytes of data per day. That's the equivalent of 270,000 hours of video. That's adding to a database that's now in the cloud that's 100 petabytes. That's the equivalent of 100 million hours of video. By comparison, Netflix only has about 9,000 hours of video in the cloud. This isn't just about moving a lot of data into the cloud and making it accessible. This is also about machine learning, because This data is so massive that human beings don't have the capacity to analyze it or to make sense of it. So what we've done is made investments over the last few years, some acquired businesses, some internal, to open this data up to a growing ecosystem of partners. For example, Facebook is using our platform to create population density maps that are supporting their Internet.org initiative. PSMA is building out a database of 15 million built structures in Australia, every built structure in Australia with 60 attributes per structure. Sarah Parcak, you may be familiar with, recently won the TED Prize for her work using our platform to discover previously undiscovered ancient cities so they can be understood and protected. And there's a sea of startups and large companies, together hundreds of developers, an even greater number of applications that are working on this platform and in the process transforming our company from what's historically been viewed as a satellite operator into an information business. So Dylan, if you ask me how is big data affecting our business, I would say big data is becoming our business.
Mm-hmm. Well said. Jane, do you mind taking a crack at that question, please?
Yeah, thanks. So good morning, everyone. At Worldview Enterprises, so maybe I should set a little context first for those who are not as familiar with what we're doing. So we are doing a lot of what these other guys are doing, but we operate in the stratosphere. We use high-altitude balloon technology, and with that, we use the local winds in the stratosphere that allow us to actually hold our satellite over an area of interest, providing true persistence for extended periods of time. For months at a time, we can carry just about any instrument over these areas, so we can be in remote locations. We can provide, as I said, the true persistence, low latency kinds of data that I think are becoming increasingly important for localized deep dive into issues that on a global level, you guys are doing with the global satellites constellations. And for us, big data has been a huge enabler from a market point of view. Your balloons have been around for hundreds of years. They were actually, in many ways, the very first vehicle that humanity flew. And the reason that we are now able to do the kinds of things, the really dramatically differentiated things that we can do with our satellites, is because of so many advances in things like battery systems and solar powers and materials and things of that nature. And a component of it, of course, is the market. We're able to bring data to this market that is very different from what you can provide through your Worldview satellites, for example. And so it is yet another data stream that is coming into this big data world. And without it, we would still be here, but probably not in such a strong way as we are.
Mm-hmm. Great. Thanks, Jane. Lars?
Yeah, I'd say, so we founded OmniEarth about 3 years ago to really facilitate this transition from an eyeball world to a machine world. And we established 2 divisions to understand what would need to change from platforms and sensor perspective. And then an analytics division start building the technology to automatically process data for that machine world. And so there's a tremendous number of changes as we go from that eyeball to machine world. But I think as Jeff alluded to right off the beginning, that's where we're all going. That's what's taking us from a several billion-dollar Earth observation market to much, much larger than I think any of us can possibly imagine.
Mm-hmm. Great. Chris, you've got a unique view being a venture capitalist and entrepreneur in residence. How is big data? I mean, big data sort of is your business, but give us a sense for how you see a changing space.
Yeah, so I switched sides from the sort of technology side to the investment side, and I'm now at a firm called Data Collective VC. They picked the name before big data was a term, and nobody really expected big data to become so central to a lot of businesses. But the way I sort of look at big data is it's more about computation. And so the data by itself is useless. And one of the things that we observed when I was part of the founding of Planet Labs was that a lot of the data that was collected by satellites was left unprocessed. And as Jeff mentioned, you know, when you build something of the size of Planet Labs where you're imaging the entire world every day, you can't hire enough people to look at all of that data for it to be useful. So either the project you have built is useless because no one can look at the data, or you invest in machine learning to process all of that data and extract insights from it. And so Planet was one of the very first space investments that Data Collective VC that made, and that sort of explains how it ended up there. And sort of central to what we do at the firm now is look at what we call the data economy, where there are parts of the space industry that supply components or systems that go towards collecting data. Then there's downstream applications like OmniEarth, where the data is being processed and used. And so we sort of have a more of a view of the whole ecosystem. And central to that is computation, as Jane is alluding. Breakthroughs in material sciences are enabling new types of launch vehicles. We can design complex engines, complex rocket nozzles. We can design satellite constellations and orbits that we couldn't do before without massive amounts of data and computation. And so that's sort of the part of the universe where we sit.
Mm-hmm. Very good. Thank you. Marco, how is it impacting you?
Well, how is impacting TIVAC? Has become one of our biggest customers. And some of the representatives are here, but other companies that are out there in need of this data continuously to then extract information. Something funny has been happening, which is they need more and more and more. And not just the quantity is mind-blowing to me. What it is very important is the diversity. Is the diversity of it. So that to find correlation and to find additional layer of information. So as TIVAC, what we did, we set up the company very early on to be able to respond to these different needs. So right now we are able to work into different domains, from imaging to synthetic aperture radar to communication to proximity operations. All these areas have all customers, either on the government side or on the commercial side, that gather this data and then combine it with additional set of data that they have and that they gather from other platforms and other systems to keep on extracting new and new and new information and new understanding. The other thing that has been doing is push our company to be global. The same need that is in the US, it's all over the world, maybe a different time, a different skill set, at different levels. And the combination with artificial intelligence or machine learning and the need of data across the world has made us having to go across the pond and just being able to serve a very diverse and a very big market in this point. So as a company, we have realigned ourselves to this need. We saw it coming. And we keep on pushing new products out depending on the response. So it's become, rather than us understanding what possibly the needs would be in 2 years, we set up the company able to react in 6 months to 1 year to the different needs that they are, and we manage all the pieces of the puzzle so that we can actually combine them together to provide that data that is needed. So that realignment has been definitely driven by the big data phenomenon.
Very good. Lars, you mentioned the size of the opportunity. You know, when we first started talking about the mega set, it was put out there that maybe this is a multi-trillion-dollar data set once you aggregate all this data, and that was a bit provocative. People thought that was pie in the sky, but how do you frame the opportunity? What do you see the opportunity being?
Yeah, I don't think it's pie in the sky. I think that it might be actually 1 trillion, maybe too small. The way I think about it is, all right, well, let's take a look at the global economy. It's about $90 trillion annually. The first crack at is, all right, how much inefficiencies are in those markets that are going to be solved through better decision making, through better information provided by automated analysis of physically observable information. And that looks like, what does that look like to me? Every time I don't switch a homeowner's insurance policy because I don't have a website to go to find out what a cheaper deal is, because it doesn't exist because there's no data about the properties to feed it, that's inefficiency that's going to get wrung out. And so that's got to be at least 10, probably 15% of the global economy. Those low-hanging fruit and inefficiencies is what we saw with enterprise software. It quickly came in and created 10, 15% efficiencies in the global economy by automating human workflows. So that's already probably 10, 15%. And I think where it gets even more exciting is, what are the automated procedures and processes and businesses we haven't thought of yet that require data like this to be enabled. We're just not even there yet, but there's a long list, and it's probably going to impact every sector of the economy. So in thinking in terms of everything is going to get automated in the future, but there's data that's necessary to enable that automation. That data is largely going to be provided from a range of sources, but one of them is going to be from the sky. A significant source of information is going to be from the sky. So that's probably larger than 10 to 15% of the global economy, and that's probably the driver of global economic growth for the next 10, 20 years.
Wow. Chris, from your unique vantage point at Data Collective, just give us a sense. You talked about computation, but AI, machine learning, creating value within space specifically, do you see space as the front end of the data and analytics curve or the back end? Would you consider the use cases primitive or advanced? Just give us a sense where the industry stacks up.
So Data Collective is actually an unusual venture capital fund because we're a mix of career venture capitalists and industry leaders who are both investors and team members in the company. So we have over 50 industry specialists from a large number of industries, from agriculture to robotics to factory automation to cloud computing. And those people fill a role similar to me. So we have quite a broad mandate for a VC fund that allows us to look at a much larger number of deals than a typical fund where the partners look at deals that are in industries they're familiar with. We have a lot of in-house expertise. So we see a lot of companies now that are doing big data. And in fact, every restaurant that collects receipts thinks they're a big data company now. And so the opportunity really is not to collect the data, but to use it. And what I see in the space industry versus a lot of the other things that I've looked at recently, including robotics and factory automation and even food chain stuff, is that the space industry is on average, a little behind in terms of the adoption of machine learning, reinforcement learning, and really using the data as a core part of the business. Now, of course, many space companies collect huge amounts of telemetry, and they process that for either station keeping or instrumentation of an engine on a test stand to test and do their design. And we were leaders in things like computational fluid dynamics. But in terms of business models, I feel that we're a little behind, present company excluded. And the issue, I think, is that just like the train system and the infrastructure in the United States, the US was one of the first countries to build a transcontinental railway, which was fantastic, but it is also now over 100 years old. And so space was, obviously with Earth imaging, the very first to adopt computers in the 1980s to do a lot of the work. But other industries have sprung up with big data as part of their founding infrastructure. And in space, we've had to play a lot of catch up, and as Digital Globe's now doing, implement a lot of those things as they come along. And so I find that versus companies that are born in the data economy, space companies are a little slow to really use that data in a transaction-like manner. And what I mean by that is extract value that a customer cares about, and actually take data, turn it into insight, communicate it to a customer, and have them either do something useful with it, make money, or solve a problem. And I see that last little part of the chain is where a lot of space companies are not quite yet getting themselves there. So.
Interesting. Jeff, we've talked a little bit about the interplay between data collection and computation. So that's one way to look at it. What about the slice between hardware and software in value creation? How do you see the interplay there?
Well, they need to be integrated at some point. That doesn't mean they need to be manufactured by the same company, but the hardware and the software needs to be part of a customer solution. I thought the point was a really important one, that to realize our full potential, we actually have to start with the customer and then work backwards and say, how do we create the solutions that serve that customer? What's the software? What types of data? It might not all be from space. It's probably not all from space. What types of hardware are going to be necessary to gather and then deliver that data?
That's helpful. Jane, you mentioned this a little bit earlier when you were talking about Worldview. Your vision of your company and data collection and the kinds of missions and projects you'll be able to run, just give us a bigger sense for that. And you actually have some client demand right now from the stratosphere.
Yeah.
If you can just touch on that a bit, that'd be helpful.
Thanks. Yeah, actually we have tremendous amount of incoming demand, which is very exciting. I think people have been looking at how do you get really sustained persistence over areas of interest for decades, right? And so with our platform, we're really able to provide that. And we operate at about 15 kilometers above the surface of the planet. So that affords us something of the perspective of, the high ground of space in a very different way. And so the kinds of things that we can do, I mean, it's probably limited by our imagination, to be truthful about it. So, at the moment we're instrument agnostic. We are a flight services company at this time, and so we fly a whole variety of instruments from optical, multispectral imaging, and then of course communications is one. If you can imagine putting a satellite over a remote area, you can provide all kinds of communications for Internet of Things as well as people in remote locations. Weather is a really interesting one. So we can place a satellite out over areas where there currently is no in situ weather data. We send up hundreds, if not thousands, of weather balloons over terrestrial areas every day, and not over the oceans, which is where a lot of our weather actually starts. We have very little visibility into what's happening in a detailed way now. So what's incredibly exciting about this big data world is that it enables all of this, right? I mean, we're getting to, you mentioned this insane amount of data that we're getting, and just a moment of nostalgia. I remember back in the day in Biosphere 2, this was back in the early 90s, and we were designing the biosphere in the 80s. And it was this revolutionary idea at the time that we were going to put 1,000 instruments inside the biosphere that, by the way, at the time, there was no off-the-shelf way for us to monitor those instruments. We had to create the system to monitor those instruments, so we understood what was going on inside the biosphere. And now I speed forward, to 30 years later, and we're doing, the same thing with our planet, and it's incredibly exciting that we're getting insights now that are helping everyday people on the ground. What was shown last night with Digital Globe and the things that you're doing. I mean, it's incredible what can happen now with all of this. It's a very exciting time.
It's wonderful. Your vehicle is unique, Jane, because it really bypasses the launch bottleneck or constraint in many ways. And I'm curious, Marco, I'm going to start with you, but Chris, I'd like you to follow Marco if you could. Is launch a constraint in terms of getting instrumentation in orbit? And how do you think about launch in your client value design equation?
Not a problem at all. There are plenty of launches for today, as we all know. No, of course it is. It is, I mean, it's cliche to say, but it is the bottleneck. Everybody talks about responsiveness. Everybody talks about, I need this tomorrow. Everybody talks about, I want to launch a constellation. I want to do a swarm. I want to do a combination, and about reconstitution and all of this, right? Well, they're great ideas, and more than ideas. They are concrete projects, people working on it. And yet, when you actually sit down and you're like, okay, let's plan it out. When am I going to launch this so that I can find the right timing to launch the other one? And so we have a delta V efficiency aspect to manage, and all of that, you just can't. Mm-hmm. There is just no way right now to take that planning to the next level. So I'm big, and I use very often the term efficiency, optimization. At a certain point, you just right now cannot do that, optimize. And I really think it will be a discriminator soon, and I really think it will be the next step that is needed to understand how much information gathering is going to be relying on space assets for the foreseeable future. So access to space is a problem. There are ways to mitigate it. I mean, we go and explore any possible launch vehicles out there, and we adopted inter-satellite link on our satellite, and we adopted propulsion on our satellite. Why? Well, not because they're fancy, not because every time we need it, is to somehow give us a chance to mitigate that variability in the launch domains that we have. because you always have a very hard decision to do. Do you pick the optimal launch vehicle on the optimal orbit, or you just go up there, right, and start gathering information? Some applications, they are literally, they don't care. We are going to launch now 5 satellites for a constellation of GPS radio occultation, in collaboration with JPL, with Geoptics. They don't care. It really doesn't matter. So in that case, launch is a constraint, but not really. It doesn't matter which altitude they are, which inclination they are. Actually, the randomness is better. But then you have other applications on the government side or commercial side where you kind of have to be there at that time in that specific orbit to make sense for the needs. I'll go back to the needs of the customer. And you simply can't. So we have a very good relationship with every single launch vehicle out there, from Russia to India to the United States, smaller, bigger, newcomers. We also have a business that does that, and so allowed us insight into what's happening. But we are crossing our fingers and really hoping and that soon there will be that leap into predictability in launch schedules and launch orbits and launch everything that allow to take all the business to the next level. So,
Chris, do you mind chiming in on that, please?
Yeah, so I mean, I sort of view my role at the moment in the world as kind of a software engineer debugging a really large piece of code, which is the space industry. And it's a very Silicon Valley-centric view, but I like to think of things from a software analogy. And so if the space industry were a piece of code, it has a major bug, which is launch. And particularly, at Planet Labs, we had 2 launch failures that didn't necessarily impact our business, but they very seriously impacted our technology development roadmap, because we lost a number of tech demos where we had to essentially put satellites into production that we weren't able to test in space earlier than we had hoped. So I consider that to be a serious defect. And so I spent a lot of the last year looking at various at different launch companies, seeing if there was anything out there that could really materially move the needle. And we just announced 2 weeks ago that I think it was a week and a half ago, that we led a major investment in Rocket Lab USA, leading a $75 million round to help them grow their business. The reason why we did that, for all of the reasons that Marco just mentioned. So if you, particularly in our data-driven economy, where we are instrumenting the world at a rapid pace, we no longer develop spacecraft on a 2 to 4 or to 6 to 8 year timeline. And there are companies springing up that may not be in business tomorrow because they didn't get their launch. And so we really want to support these more agile, faster companies that are growing and having regular access to space, reliable launch schedules, and a vehicle that is reliable and can deliver payloads is extremely important. So we are seeing some big developments at the very large end. Jeff Bezos is joining the ultra-large launch sector. We considered that sort of covered and sort of beyond our scope to be able to materially help. But at the small end, Rocket Lab was the perfect sweet spot for us to be able to put some money into a company we believe was going to help bring repeatable launch, regular cadence, and predictability, and extremely short turnarounds to the launch industry. So for any payload, 150 kilograms or smaller, we are hoping that in the future this will be a solved problem. And it's critical for unlocking all of the potential for all of these startups. If they can't launch, they have no business. So.
Lars, did you want to add to that?
Yeah, if I may, I'll inject some controversial statement. I would say from the big picture perspective, I'd say launch isn't a problem. The problem is there's not enough additional demand for the stuff that we're all putting into space. If there was, we could solve really, really quickly, right? So if the end game is multi-trillion-dollar markets, launch is not what's standing in our way of unlocking that, because we're talking about primarily Earth observation data. Go fly an airplane anytime you want. If you've got a willing and paying customer, trust me, you can afford to go fly an airplane and go gather that data. So go do that, get the market established and developed, and then lower your cost with the satellite. I think that's actually the biggest hurdle we're facing right now, is unlocking those applications that Jeff alluded to, getting those unlocked, and then boy, the demand's going to explode, and launch will get very rapidly solved because all the incredible demand for getting systems up in space.
Interesting. Just a side note on Rocket Labs, I think it was published at a $1.2 billion valuation, thereabouts, Chris?
In the ballpark.
So, I mean, another unicorn in space based upon this constraint that we've just talked about. But your point's well taken, Lars. I think I understand it. It's well said. Jeff, I'm curious, this whole notion of horizontal integration versus vertical integration, more of an industry dynamics question, really. I mean, given your prominent role running a large publicly traded company, how do you think about that? How do you frame that?
Well, I actually think it's both. I think for certain applications and certain customers that we serve, being vertically integrated enables us to serve them better. However, unbundling, unpackaging that capability and selling, for example, access to production or access to the analytics or access to our channels has enabled us to build an ecosystem of literally hundreds of organizations that buy a part of what we do. And I think that's enabling the creation of new opportunities and new solutions, and is really important to unlocking the potential of that multi-trillion-dollar market opportunity that we hope is all out there.
Yeah, that's right. Great. Thanks for that. A couple of questions from the audience I just want to make sure I start touching on. We will have a Q&A session at the end, but one more sort of broad-based question anyone on the panel can take it is, how do we democratize the data set? In other words, how do we enable, whether it's consumers or smaller companies, to actually access the data, create products and services around that? They could be for-profit uses or they could be non-for-profit uses. I know Planet Labs, for example, Chris, is doing some work in the humanitarian realm with giving their data set to certain nonprofits. But does anyone want to take a stab at that? How do we democratize data?
Well, we're actually doing that today. We have $3 billion invested in space and on the ground. But for early stage startups, many of whom are bootstrapped or venture-backed, accessing that data resource actually costs very little, because our model, for the most part, with startups and early stage companies, is a very small subscription and a percentage of revenue. So as they unlock their market opportunity, we all benefit. So I think that's going very far down the road of democratization. On the question of helping the global development community, that's actually a different type of question, and we do humanitarian work. It's core to our purpose. We do a lot of things one-off without payment. When the Associated Press reporters called us asking to help identify and document illegal transshipment, we obviously didn't charge for that. But to really make a difference beyond that, we need sustainable programs where it's not one-off, but it's actually repeatable, so that we can, for example, monitor the seas on an ongoing basis for illegal transshipment. And that actually requires some level of financial sponsorship, or it's not sustainable. Fortunately, there are individuals and organizations out there who are willing to invest in those sorts of good works.
That's great. Does anyone want to add to that, Chris, please?
Yeah, so when I was at Planet, one of the founding principles of the company was the data be accessible to everyone, and we really meant everyone. We did run into a little bit of trouble using the phrase democratizing access, because a lot of folks in Europe think that means free. So it doesn't have to be free, but it has to be available. And so we really focused very heavily on what does availability mean. And in some cases it does mean free. In some cases it means very deep discounts. But the most important thing that we considered to help sort of spurn democratization of access to Earth imagery data was building tools and systems to allow us to have reach, so that we could actually, for a small company of then only roughly 100 people, how do we actually get Earth imagery out to everybody in a consumable fashion? And so Planet was always really two startups in one. There was the satellite imaging part that was designing satellites. We are owner-operator of Earth imaging satellites. But we're also a data company that has built a world-class API that anyone can actually build an app on top of. And just sort of like the Google Maps model, where there are so many places where you see Google Maps embedded in applications, we took a lesson from that, which is, and also particularly Google's ability to disseminate data worldwide. So Planet now has data centers all around the world and an ability to push data out to people and for people to plug into it no matter where they are, no matter what their application, no matter what the size of the company is. And the company just announced, I think 2 weeks ago, an online map browser where you can go in and actually see frequently updated imagery of your location in a number of sort of test areas. And over time, that will grow to where the company will unveil the whole world, where you can dig in and look and see what's actually happening. And so that's what availability and democratization means to us, the fact that you can actually get hold of it without any barrier.
Lars?
Yeah, I'll add another word to the democratization availability mix, which is commoditization. I think we got to keep forcing that route. I hear all the time, oh, data is commoditized. Well, that's not true, because it isn't actually commoditized. There's no marketplace, there's no known pricing, and that keeps entities from wanting to build and standardize around it. When something truly is commoditized, you can understand and predict its price within a certain constraint. You have multiple suppliers, and then you can really start, faithfully building using that as something as an input. Cheerios knows it's going to get oats from somewhere for the foreseeable future, doesn't mind investing in it, in that. We got to do the same thing with streams of data, right? We have to start commoditizing the easy to do stuff, so it's low price, easy to access, and we'll keep working on that next generation stuff. But we haven't commoditized anything yet. There is no, standard 1 meter pixel. There's no standard, 5 meter pixel. That doesn't exist, and we should probably go about creating it. We'll make more money.
Sure. I want to come back to that point, but just building on what you just said, Marco, when you said earlier that you're designing essentially missions or projects around the client demand, how do you know where the market is going, and how do you see the market evolving for the projects that you're currently working on?
Good question. I know my limitations, and my limitation is I don't know the market. I'm not a data guy. I'm not a ship monitoring guy. I'm not none of those. What I am is a person that I sit down and I listen to people's needs. I'll give you a couple of examples. One is synthetic aperture radar. Right now, everybody's out doing that. We started a year and a half ago when a company that already does that. They already buy synthetic aperture radar information, and they extract the information they need to support different type of businesses, from oil to ship monitoring, many around the world. I knew nothing about that. So I sit down by chance with them, and we started talking. And they were like, what really would make a difference for me is having not 15 or 50 modes in my synthetic aperture radar satellites that are being launched. I usually really use 2 of them, or 3 top, for the vast majority of the data. What I need, though, is not to be in the traditional time of the day, which all the satellites are usually, and I need them to be able to be multiple, so that it brings down the time, and you can start building up stacks of information rather than everybody knows when the satellite passes over, they don't do any activity, and hence you kind of lose that information, right, that you may want to gather. So what we did is we took all of that and was like, okay, what is the quality that you need? What are the constraints around that? And they threw all over that. And what we did is we went off our own money, and we did a feasibility study and say, okay, all of this information that we gather, we tap into experts of synthetic aperture radar, and I was like, is it possible? Does it even exist a solution, technological solution that allows us to cater to that need? It took us a little bit to actually get to that result, which is, it's a peculiar result, but it actually is very good at the end of the day, because customers are not disrupted. They get the data that they're used to get. They don't get all the fanciness around that, or they get all the options that they have, but that's driven by the business. So you work around the business case and hence the cost, and without compromising the quality to get to the result. Once we were ready for that, it was extremely easy to find the customer and say, are you interested in this? Yeah. And voila, in literally a matter of a month, we had the customer ready to go. And what we did, because we believe so much, we then say, maybe there are other customers out there. So we are co-developing it, so we can then go out and keep on with this process. Same thing happened in the imaging. I completely rejected the notion of getting into imaging, because this is why. There are people that have been doing it for a while. I can give you all the information you need. Until a customer came to us and say, yes, I can get all the data, but I really need this in this situation with this agility and all of that. Can you do it? And so we did exactly the same process, and we came up with a solution for that. It takes time. It's not like just happened, right? But that's the company we built, was able to support all of that. So we're going to keep on doing these type of things. The beauty from my point of view is that we retain part of that knowledge, and we retain part of that access to the customer. And now, all of a sudden, we have a SAR, we have an imaging, we have GPS occultation, we have other type of communication, and you can start connecting the dot in new product that no single customer needs, but that they have the next generation of need, what I was talking before about simultaneous multiple layers of information.
Yeah.
So that's kind of the approach.
That's helpful, thank you. Lars, back to your point on commoditization, standardization, some of these friction points, if you will. One of the things that might solve that is if you had a natural aggregator of this data. And there's been speculation that maybe it's Google, maybe it's Facebook, maybe it's one of the large data companies that exist today that might get more directly involved in space Earth observation telemetry. And we know a little bit about Facebook's plans. We know now Google is divesting of some of their space assets. But how do you see that playing out?
Yeah, I think somebody's got to stand up and take that, and a big customer's got to help them. That's usually how it works out. It only happens when a really big customer gets frustrated, and usually teams up with someone with the capacity to create a market. Amazon's probably a really good candidate. They've been gathering freely available data sets already from the US and European governments and making them essentially available to drive CPU usage, so they're probably a prime candidate. But really, I think a big customer is going to have to start cooperating with a big warehouser and distributor of bits to really kick this off. And there's a couple candidates. Microsoft's another one for that warehouse distribution channel.
And IBM is another company that you've had a relationship with in the past. Do you see them getting more involved directly?
It's definitely something that fits in with their business model. So I think what's missing now is that big customer.
Sure.
At least one or a cohort of customers want to get together and team up with that distributor.
Chris, did you have something to add to that?
Yeah, just to put in another plug for my old friends at Planet. To solve the problem of ingesting and processing the whole world every day, we had to build a giant cloud computing resource to do that. And so that's enabled us to do some other neat things, like syndicate other data sources. So Planet currently now ingests all of Sentinel and Landsat data and makes it available as an additional layer on the Planet API. And so you can get all of those in one place. We're also, the company, is in talks with other data providers to provide more layers. And I sort of see it like an onion skin, where you can put more layers, not just raster maps of the Earth, but you can add vector layers, so actual markup. That enables things like natural language processing and search queries. You can have other data like hydrological and atmospheric and weather data, topology, soil and climate data. All of those layers can be added. And so by solving, just like Amazon now is in the cloud computing business because they had to build servers to deal with the load at Christmas and Black Friday, we are now able to syndicate all kinds of data because we had to build that to solve our own problem. And so if anyone actually has any data sources, the folks at Planet would love to talk to you and add that as an additional layer on the product.
If I might just add something,
sure,
and I don't want to claim the mantle of the industry aggregator, but we have customers that require us to integrate data from literally hundreds of data layers from dozens of sources. We work with others here at the table. We work with national satellite operators who are looking to monetize their data. And so we have SAR data. We have all sorts of data in what we call the digital globe. And I don't believe we're the only ones who will do that. But the customers that we really focus on are demanding that of us, and we're rising to the challenge.
Sure. No, that's good. And not to put you on the spot, Jeff, but we've got a couple of questions from the audience. We've been talking about the optimistic future sort of visionary of big data and how it can positively impact the world. I mean, there is a darker side potentially to the data sources, whether it's data security and having breaches of sensitive data, which is an issue. And obviously, some of this data can be used by bad actors who might wish others harm. How do you prevent that? How do you think about that? How do you design that in your client requirements?
Well, you have to design it into your business model and your technology from the very beginning. And by the very nature of the customers that we serve,
Sure.
Because our original vertical was serving defense and intelligence. It's moved into serving location-based services, oil and gas, many others. But to serve these customers, which we've now done over the course literally of decades, we have to earn their trust. And that requires a tremendous investment. It requires a growing investment. And it also requires holding ourselves to a very high standard, a higher standard than the government regulations would typically hold one to in terms of what we do with our data, who we sell our data to.
Yeah.
Now, with that said, we also can't lose sight of the fact that every technology, from the time an ancient person, ancient man or woman picked up a stone tool, that stone tool could have been used as a weapon. Yeah. And most of our technology can be used for good and evil. And so, that is the nature of the world that we live in. And hopefully organizations and individuals holding themselves to high moral standards, in our case, our purpose, vision, and values, which is fundamentally core to our company, is what enables us to make what we believe are the right decisions day in and day out by 2,000 team members.
Yeah. Jane, you're a visionary and thought leader on this whole notion of ecosystems and the interdependencies of all the partners within an industry working together. Just give us a sense for how you sort of see not only worldview, but data and some of these issues we've raised, and where you see the interdependencies. I'd love your views on that.
Yeah, so I definitely look at it as an ecosystem, and that's probably because that's my background.
Of course.
Is looking at total systems and their interplay, and particularly at the stage that this industry is in, if I can call it an industry, because it's really many industries that are coming together. I mean, that's also what's really exciting here, right? Is we're getting new industries coming to partner in ways that have never worked together before. And that's very exciting, and it's very enabling for all. So, for example, you might say we're at one part, if you think of it as a value chain, we're at one end of the value chain, really, as the infrastructure, in one mode that we operate in. We partner with instrument providers. We partner with a variety of instrument providers. We partner with the data analytics folks, data aggregators. There's, I think, in the way that we put together our business model is founded in the notion of an ecosystem. I think we all have to, in some regards, stay true to where our strengths are. We can't all be all things all the time, even though we might want to be. And so, we're at this stage of our business really focused on the platform. And so it's incredibly important for us to operate within an ecosystem. And also, in what everybody's been saying here today, with the growth of this ecosystem, the rising tide really does float all boats. I think that it's going to take every aspect of this. We were hearing about the incredible amount of data that is pouring into the big data world, and it then takes other companies that are taking that data and turning it into actionable intelligence. And we're really just seeing that come online now in a major way. And that is having tremendous positive impact on the entire ecosystem. So that's really how we approach it as being an ecosystem player.
That's great. Thank you. So we have about 9 or 10 minutes before our Q&A session. And what I'd like to do, just to maybe close the formal panel component, is I'm going to go in turn. I'll probably start with you, Marco, and work our way right to left here. But I'd love to get your 1 or 2 bold predictions for how you see the industry evolving vis-a-vis big data, and try to stretch our vision out to 2025, 2027, something in the near term, but far enough out that we can get some insight into where you see the industry going.
Well, I'm going to give you the perspective from the world I live in, which is the small satellite platforms, and how in that time frame, I at least from my point of view, I see them evolving because of the drive of of big data and the quality of the data, not just the quantity, and I want to stress that. Finally, we are not fearful anymore in the community to actually venture in form factors that are, and in satellite sizes that are no longer constrained by the needs of secondary launches. So bold prediction is launch vehicles like the one Chris and his company has invested in are going to actually comes up. That would enable satellite manufacturer or data providers like we are, and both government and commercial, to make long-term sustainable plans to have evolutions in terms of data needs and information from that data. Satellites are going to keep on, from my world of the small one, platforms are going to keep on getting better and better, and there's going to be a big discriminator of ability to stay and keep up with the pace in terms of instruments, pace in terms of amount of satellite, so the whole production aspect, and pace in terms of quality of the data coming through. By the time that is the 10 years outlook, I think we're going to take away a lot of the stress from the space aspect, and we're going to keep on looking at more of the integrated aspects. So I don't foresee a company like mine being able to venture away just from a space unique situation and start adding layers from lower layers in the atmosphere or ground or even underground that would allow to actually create a complete integration of all that set of data, again, to go back to that optimization and sustainability of everything that is needed. So I don't know how bold it is, but that's my outlook.
That's great. Chris?
Yeah, so I think big data is here to stay, and hopefully the term disappears. But the data is not going away. And I think what will disappear is small data. And so I think there is, just like there was at the advent of the personal computer era, the personal business computer was pivotal in changing how we all did our jobs. And I think that data, large and small, is here to stay, and it'll be a central part of how we all do our business. So my big prediction is everyone in this room is going to regret not taking that stats course back in college. And I certainly do. Because being able to be deft and agile and proficient in interpreting data and understanding what you're getting. And even if software developers build fantastic reinforcement learning tools to bring out insights into data and to tell us where to look. At the end of the day, a human being still has to look, maybe guided to the part of the world where something interesting is happening, but still make an interpretation about what's happening there. If they believe it's actionable, should they pay attention? And when you're scanning the whole world every day and building a huge sphere of data, where you put your attention and being careful with that decision is even more important. And so, I ask everyone in this room to maybe, brush up on their stats and think about it, because both being proficient and being skeptical are important, and our attention is the most important asset we have, and we're at risk of being drowned by this data, but there's so much potential to be unlocked. It isn't going to go away. So we have to get used to it. We have to live in that reality. And I think the mid-21st century is going to be dominated by a data-centric economy, and the people that are not able to look into that data are going to be on the losing end of that equation. And just like, we see this huge proliferation of cell phones, because right now you can't even open a bank account, deposit a check, or order a taxi without a cell phone. In about 20 or 30 years, you won't be able to run a business without an in-house ability to digest and interpret very large data sets. That's some of my big prediction there.
That's bold. That's good. Lars?
All right, I'll try to, I've struggled being bold earlier in the panel, so now I'm really going to try. So
Turn it up to 100.
So I think in the next 10 years, there's going to be a company that'll do $1 trillion in annual revenue, and they're going to be the company that uses AI and all this physical observation data sets to help virtually every other company and government adopt the benefits of that technology.
Is it going to be called OmniEarth?
I'd like it to be.
Yeah, that's good. Jeff, you're next.
Yeah. I believe we're all going to be the beneficiaries of a living digital inventory of the planet. That a digital globe we call the digital globe, but it could take other forms. And it's going to have near ubiquitous and continuous coverage of the Earth at a resolution resolution that matters and helps make decisions. And that's going to enable the driverless car. It's going to enable bringing internet to everyone. It's going to enable the eradication of polio and other diseases. It's going to eradicate or bring a near end to illegal and unreported fishing, and make the world we live in a better place. And I truly believe that. I actually believe we're seeing that happen today.
Great. Jane.
So when you look back about 100+ years and the Kitty Hawk first flew, we see that today aviation and all the business that is transacted in the troposphere is about $1 trillion a year, plus or minus. And then you look up, and that's up to what, about 50,000 feet, roughly? And then you go from about 100 miles on out, and we have hundreds of billions of dollars transacted. And if you then include sort of the data economy that the space economy is driving, very large amount of business. And in between the two is this region called the stratosphere, where today almost zero is happening, just a little above zero in these large numbers that we're talking about. So my bold prediction is that in a few short years, you are going to see that the stratospheric economy is going to be a major driver in this greater space and aerial economy.
That's great. And just to maybe build on a couple of comments, I would just add, and I wrote about this in the article I referenced at the beginning of our remarks, this multi-trillion-dollar data set. I think one of the things that I would predict is this whole notion of data being predictive and really leveraging this AI. I think, Chris, you're spot on. We're swamped in data, and no human being, even with a statistics PhD and all the computational power in the world, can't crack that without some additional supplementation. So I think this whole notion of leveraging machine learning, to be sure, but AI, and I think the advent of AI, and taking the use cases from understanding what's happening to understanding what will happen, I think that's when you're really going to see phenomenal value creation. And so my bold prediction would be that's really going to be the tail wagging the dog, or vice versa. And I think that's going to happen sooner than we anticipate. So that would be what I would add to that. So we're right at 15 minutes, which is how much we wanted to leave for Q&A. I've got several questions teed up here on the iPad. If you have other questions, please send those through and they'll show up here. And I want to start with a couple, and I'll just kind of throw these out there. Whoever on the panel would like to address them, please do. But we have a question on education. You know, one of the things I think we're all passionate about, and I think Chris, obviously being co-founder of Singularity, I know it's a passion of yours, is how do we educate and excite the next generation of space advocates? And so this question specifically is, what does the industry see as the role of STEM educators to prepare learners to process big data? How do we get them ready and excited about the future? Who wants to take that one?
I can take it.
Go ahead, Marco, please.
Working in a company and being an individual that owes everything to the experience that I was able to have when I came to the United States and the hands-on engineering experience I had, and all the other founders of the company come from that background. Education is actually, within my organization, is the #1 outreach that we do. And we do it across the world. And we do it from high schools all the way to professionals having to have additional training and so on. I think it's our duty. I think it's a fundamental part, and you can look at it from two different points of view because everybody's got personality. One is it's just the right thing to do, right? It's a perpetual machine that you need to feed and enable like it helped you in the past. The other one is business. If you want to stay around and you want to keep on having something of a certain quality, and you have to train as early as you can the new generation of people that are going to come after you and are going to feed into this big ambitious project that we are bold prediction that we're making. And you kind of, it doesn't matter if you look at it from an outreach point of view or from a business point of view, the results is always the same. So the earlier you do it, the more you get them excited, and it's the simple things that make it, by the way, across the world is always like that. I've seen no differentiation from teaching in India to Italy to the United States. Always the same reactions. So our part, we're going to keep on doing it, but I really think it's a mandatory thing that everybody should have as part of their curriculum within an organization.
Great. Anyone else want to add to that? Yeah, Chris.
Yeah, so, you know, in the words of, you know, Captain James T. Kirk, you know, space, the final frontier, but this strange thing happened in the 1990s, and this other thing came along called the internet. And all of the, you know, if you look at the photos of, you know, I forget the number, I think it was like the average age during Apollo was 23 or something like that, maybe 26. So very young. And if you look at all of the photos, you know, there are all of these, you know, young people, you know, working on Apollo, and it's what they did straight out of college. And for, you know, about 20 years, just as I was committing myself to being in the space industry, people were getting into the software industry. And so very early on, I realized that everything I wanted to do in space, you know, because you can't do it alone, required that we get people back into the industry. And so I've had a very huge focus on, personally and in the projects I've worked on, to educate people, to teach STEM, science, technology, mathematical proficiency, software development. And now, strangely enough, those two worlds have combined, and the internet is now, you know, permanent part. It's part of our infrastructure. It's like the water. We don't even think about it anymore. And people are starting to wonder what they can do with this internet thing finally. And we're seeing now, you know, internet-driven, data-driven, computation-driven space companies. And so finally, my two worlds have merged. And my personal goal is to get everyone from the software industry back into space, and help, you know, build the future that we think humanity deserves. And that's a lot of the reasons why a lot of us are here. And so central to that is just people being in the industry, being aware that there are opportunities to work in space, and that the skills that they have, no matter where they came from, are relevant. And for us, you know, particularly in terms of, you know, severely shifting the gender balance of this industry, getting girls and women interested in science and technology and giving them opportunities to work in this field. And I think that that is one of the most important things we can all do, is we will not get anything done without help. And the best way to get help is to enlist our fellow human beings in our mission. And I think education and opportunities to participate in the space industry are the right way to do that.
That's great. Yeah, well said.
Well said.
Jeff, I'm going to pose this one to you if I could. It's actually from Bobby Shackleton at Bloomberg, and it's more of a general question, but what are the new markets and industries, sectors that show the greatest opportunity in your mind in terms of use cases happening right now, call it now within the next 3 to 5 years?
Some of the most exciting use cases we're seeing, I mentioned earlier in my remarks, the autonomous vehicle needs a huge amount of data to operate safely. And I believe that many of the participants on this panel in the room are in a position to contribute to that. Telecommunications, and specifically what's going on with 5G, requires a lot of data in order to realize its full potential. So we're excited about that. We're also excited about what we're seeing going on in the humanitarian world. The work that the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation is doing, for example, with Earth observation data, or World Resources Institute, whether it's protecting the forests or eradicating disease. I believe there's tremendous potential that we're seeing, and the fact is these are sustainable programs that people are investing in order to make our world a better place.
That's great. Lars, do you want to touch on maybe whether it's weather sensing, water, maybe the built environment with insurance? Just give people a taste for those use cases as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think the built environment and insurance is a great example, but even broader sense, everything associated with properties. And you have urgency, which is going to drive adoption, and autonomous cars are a great example of that. But then you have just large market size and the efficiencies that could be created within it. And I get really excited about properties for those reasons. So everyone here interacts with properties all the time when you buy and, you know, maintain your own home as an example. But it's a very large market. Just residential properties alone in the U.S. are $27 trillion. That's a massive asset class, larger than the U.S. stock market, by the way. And good news is you can see it all from the sky, so that's important for the people on the panel. But then when you start thinking about it from the perspective of a homeowner, raise your hand if you think the last time you purchased and sold a home that was a seamless, really easy to handle experience. It's not. It's got a lot of things wrong with it, and there's a lot of ways we can help with that in terms of providing ready-to-go pre-built data associated with the home you're selling and the home you're buying that the insurance company needs, the mortgage company needs. You should be able to buy and sell your home and maintain most aspects of it from your phone. There's a tremendous amount of data that's necessary to make that a reality, and we can provide most of the missing data. So I get really excited from that, not because that's an urgent market, because it's a market with a lot of potential.
And that touches on really the next question. When you have ubiquitous, persistent data, including data regarding properties, what are the privacy issues that come up? Because obviously with facial recognition, AI, and all these kinds of items that are emerging as well, are there concerns, or how do we mitigate concerns that we're approaching a lack of privacy in the public domain?
That's a tough one. I mean, the United States, luckily, has had a long history of aerial imagery collection, so people are used to it. When Google Earth came out, it didn't surprise us that those pictures existed. It surprised us how easy they were to use, so that helps us a little bit. But as the resolutions get higher, as the collection frequency gets more common, I like to think about the first time somebody uses one of these data platforms to check on to see whether their husband or wife is cheating on them is the first time people are going to start getting concerned about privacy. That's not quite a reality yet, but it's going to be. That's where I think it's really important where machine learning comes in. Much in the way when you go through the microwave scanners at the airport, there's no longer a person looking at that actual picture of your nearly naked body. It's a machine looking at it, and that makes everybody feel a little bit more comfortable about the situation. The same thing is going to have to be true of our industry. We have to promise people that there are not people spying on them. The machines are interpreting everything, and those are the things we're going to have to start implementing and worrying about. So I think machine learning is also our savior when it comes to managing public perception of the technology as well.
Can I just add something to that?
Yeah, sure, Chris.
So again, education is really important here, and one of the biggest problems with being overwhelmed with data is dealing with false positives and false negatives. And so I heard an anecdote of a woman who accused her husband of cheating based on Google Earth data because she asked him what he was doing every day, and he said he was home. Yet the map clearly showed his car was not in the parking lot. And so I think having people, while they may be familiar that these products exist, actually understanding how GPS works, why they can navigate where they are, how those images got collected, how frequent they are, what they are, how they were obtained, how old is that image, that kind of thing. And having people be proficient in the use of that data is really important if they're going to get value from it and not make mistakes as well. And I think so that's really important that we take on a role to be driving education and proficiency in the tools that we're creating.
Yeah, can I just make one thing very clear so there's no misinformation here? From the perspective of Earth observation at the resolutions that we operate at, both legally and are technically capable of operating at, we are very far from anything that's remotely resembling personally identifiable information.
Yeah, thanks for making that point. Really interesting question, Marco. I'm going to pose this to you, but we've been talking about big data and machine learning, AI, driving customer use cases. But what about the actual missions that some of these companies are running on the engineering side? There's a lot of data collection that is collected. Can that data, can we leverage machine learning and other techniques to actually make those missions more efficient, learn more about the design process? How do you think about that in your role?
The answer is absolutely yes. So one of the biggest investments we have done is not in the satellites. It actually is in the entire backhaul of how we manage the data internally to the company. Something that started as an intern effort for 3 months has become now what has been people that have come to our facility that have seen it as maybe the state of the art of ability to interact with all the data mining, data information that we do. And it goes from hardware to human, and everything is interconnected to it. And so we had to hire somebody that is able to interpret data because we weren't able to. And the increase in efficiency and in cost prediction and in schedule prediction and everything else has been unbelievable. Now, we keep on that one. We have something that started as a maybe it will help as now becoming an important aspect of everything we do, from as-run procedures to everything. And by the way, we open that to the customers. So customers, we are taking away one of the layers of communication, which is please let me know how you have done that. And they say, okay, let me just PDF something and send it to you. We just open it to them and say, it's so easy to compartmentalize and to give different level of access. And they love it. Customers love it. They have insight. They wake up in the morning at 8 a.m., having breakfast. They can log in and see, what is my project going today? And so it's been working out great. What we are really interested in is to take this type of information and to our satellites that are flying and the one that will fly. I mentioned before that we are outfitting all our satellites essentially for free. It's a features that we put on it with ability to talk to each other and ability to understand where they are. We have another big investment we've done has been in proximity operations and rendezvous capability and being done autonomously. That my past helps with that, and a lot of the people in the company have been exposed to that. All of that is toward being able to have, let's call it autonomous swarms, if you want, that can help each other, so that if you have a train of satellites, all of them with different capabilities, by the time you get to the last one, has already been fed by information coming from the previous ones. And that is something that, we're not ready for it. No, I don't think anybody's ready for it right now. But it's definitely something that we see big data handling and ability to do that machine learning, enabling new type of mission that right now are not possible.
Great. Anyone want to build on that? Okay, just a question really for you, Chris, but Lars, I would ask you to build on it, because I've heard you talked about 10 to the 12th sensors existing. But the question reads, does the panel, Chris in particular, believe there are now enough different space-based collection sources to feed the global analytics and knowledge product needs? And if not, what else is needed?
Yes and no. So we have, I think, as you alluded to, almost a glut of data that's unprocessed. And so there's little point collecting more if you're not using what you've already collected. So I think the first port of call for everybody here is really go that last mile and find out what your customers need. Get your boots dirty, go out into, if you're doing agricultural products, go onto a farm and actually meet farmers and sell them products. I think that's step one. But there are still some gaps. SAR is one of those. We led an investment in a company called Capella Aerospace that's doing synthetic aperture radar from a small sat, launching a fleet. They hope to have more SAR capability than the rest of the world combined within 2 years. So I think that is critically important. Being able to see through cloud and to be able to see at night is extremely important. And also meshing together data from the ground sensors and other types of telemetry that we have, they're all very important as well. And a lot of the data exists, and getting it into one place so that it can be used in a coherent fashion is also important. So.
That's great. Lars, you're going to have the final word.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, I would say yes and no. We're not utilizing all the data that's being collected today because we haven't connected to the application that data frequency, resolution, and modality is good enough for. But having said that, some of the largest markets are in data, resolutions, frequencies, and modalities we're not yet collecting. And so that's why I would say yes and no. And so you guys start with the business problem and then understand. Agriculture is a great example that I think we all learn right away. Like, all right, if it's going to be useful, it's got to be reliable every single week, 2 to 5 meters. That's really what it needs to be, at least that. It could be better than that, but if it's not at least that, no one will adopt it. That's why it's not being adopted. So understanding the cadence of the business problem is really, I think, paramount to serving the market.
Fantastic. Well, we're at time, guys. Please join me in thanking our panel for an outstanding discussion. Thank you all.
Thank you, Dylan, and thank you to all the panelists. The topics you discussed are certainly relevant to the future of space, and I expect these types of conversations will continue throughout this week, so we really appreciate your contributions. We're transitioning now to our lunch, and for our lunch, we have the opportunity to honor the space warfighters. For those who have tickets, the Space Warfighters Luncheon, sponsored by Ball Aerospace, will begin shortly in Colorado Hall. We'll begin to reconvene here at 2 o'clock. Thank you so much and enjoy your lunch.